Wedding Bells Ahead by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 9. Sarah Jane to the Rescue. By the time the day ended, I had a pounding headache.
"I don't want any supper, Augusta,"
I told her when I reached home.
"I'm going to lie down until this pain stops."
She nodded, and the grim look on her face told me that she knew about Len and Elizabeth. To her credit, she refrained from saying, "I told you so." In my room, I dropped my books on the desk and flung myself across the bed, too angry to cry. Sooner or later, I knew I would have to face Len and break our engagement, but I was in no shape to go through that right now. I tried to sort out my tangled feelings. Perhaps the most horrifying thought was that Cy Lawton would make trouble for Len. Whether he felt he had a legitimate case or not, he was sure to press his advantage. Elizabeth had left with Len, and they had not returned until the following day. Those facts would be hard to refute. For the first time in my life, I seemed unable to pray about a problem. I could not imagine the end of the world being more bleak. Len arrived right after supper time, and Augusta came to my door. "Len is here. Do you want to come out?"
"No."
She turned and went back to the kitchen. "She's resting, Len. She won't be out this evening." I couldn't hear Len's reply, but the outside door closed and the house was quiet. I fell into an uneasy sleep, awoke later, and undressed for bed. I might as well not have bothered because I didn't go to sleep again. When I heard Augusta stirring, I went out to help with breakfast. "You're going to school this morning?" she asked.
"Yes. I can't spend the rest of my life in bed."
"You look like something the cat wouldn't have," Augusta commented. "I hope you're going to eat some breakfast."
"I feel like something the cat already had,"
I replied.
"And the only reason I'm eating breakfast is because I don't want to fall in a heap before the day is over."
The children had the good sense to give me plenty of room, and the morning dragged on uneventfully. Even Julie Ann was silent, a circumstance which probably saved her from mortal injury. About an hour before dismissal time, I reached a decision. I would go to see Sarah Jane.
"Children, I have something to take care of this afternoon. I'm going to let you leave early. Take the lessons you haven't completed home with you, and I'll expect finished work on my desk tomorrow morning." Faces brightened, and the children lost no time getting books and papers together and charging out of the building. I was close on the heels of the last child to leave. Len didn't hear me approach the barn, and he jumped when I spoke to him. "May I please take Regal and the buggy for a few hours?"
Of course. Is everything all right?" he asked anxiously. "Did you hear from home?"
"Everything is fine. I have an errand to take care of."
He hurried to bring Regal out and hitch him to the buggy. "If you had let me know, I would have met you at school. You needn't have walked over." He helped me up into the seat. "Mabel, please." The look of pain and bewilderment on his face almost unnerved me. I wanted to jump down and throw my arms around his neck, but I hardened my heart.
"I'll be home before dark,"
I said pointedly, and drove out of the yard without looking back. I arrived in Edenville before Sarah Jane had left her school.
"Sarah Jane,"
I said as I marched to the front of the room.
"tell me that there is still something funny about life."
She looked startled and then sat back in her chair and raised one eyebrow. "Well, for starters, you have your hat on sideways." I grabbed my hat and threw it on the front desk, then promptly sat on it. Alarm registered on her face. "Mabel, have you had bad news from home?"
"No, I haven't,"
I snapped.
"Why is everyone concerned about Ma when I'm the one that's in trouble?"
She looked relieved. "Somehow I'm not surprised to hear that. It's a little like reading last week's newspaper."
"Sarah Jane, can you be serious for once in your life?"
"Mabel, you came storming in here in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon with your hat on sideways and asked if life is funny. Now, I don't suppose you want to tell me what's going on."
"I'm not going to marry Len."
She took that in. "Oh dear, and I was so looking forward to standing up with you. I was planning on a new dress.
Sarah Jane!
I wailed. If I fell apart with sorrow, you'd start to howl. I can get more out of you if you're mad. Now, start at the beginning. She came around and sat on the desk next to me. And get off your hat. I stood up and she began to punch my hat back into shape.
I don't know where to begin,
I said. You'd better start somewhere unless you intend to spend the night, Sarah Jane suggested. At that, I burst into tears and she put her arms around me. I know it has to be awful. Why don't you give me the worst thing first?
Leonard will probably have to marry Elizabeth, I sobbed.
Sarah Jane took out a handkerchief. Here, you're getting your front all wet. Was this her idea or his?
Her father's.
And I thought the days of arranged marriages were past. What's the next worst thing? She continued.
Len didn't tell me she was going.
Sarah Jane patted my hand. Mabel, I seem to be missing a vital link in this story. What would you think of starting at the top and working your way back down? I gulped and began with the fact that Len had accompanied Jerome to Springdale on Monday, that he had not returned until Tuesday noon, and that I'd learned from a schoolchild that Elizabeth had been with him. Sounds like a good plot for a melodrama, Sarah Jane said. So what was Len's explanation?
He didn't give me one.
You mean he came riding in with a strange horse 18 hours late and didn't tell you why?
I told him I didn't want to know.
Ah, Sarah Jane grinned. Now that's the Mabel I know and love. You'd rather imagine a terrible disaster than listen to a logical explanation.
What logical explanation could there possibly be?
I demanded hotly.
He took her to Springdale for whatever reason, and they came back alone. What else do I need to know?
Several things come to mind, Sarah Jane said. If it were my fiancé, I'd want to know how the horse got away. I'd also ask how Elizabeth knew he was going to Springdale and what reason she gave for needing to tag along, assuming, of course, that she made the arrangements.
I can't even assume that,
I retorted bitterly. In other words, Sarah Jane supplied, you don't trust Len. I heard myself saying to Augusta,
if I can't trust him, I have no business planning to marry him.
I shifted uncomfortably on the desk.
It takes two people to make arrangements like that,
I muttered. Didn't you say that Jerome was along? Maybe Elizabeth appealed to him without Len knowing it. Jerome isn't acquainted with her wicked ways yet. He might not have realized that she had anything more devious in mind than a day's shopping trip.
I never thought of that.
You are nosing up the wrong trail, my girl, Sarah Jane stated. Follow that horse. There's the key to the whole web of intrigue.
You're probably right,
I said.
But I've never had a whole lot of luck conversing with horses. How do I get Regal to talk?
Ask Len, Mabel. You didn't give him a chance to tell you what he knew. I thought it over for a moment.
Suppose what you say is true. We still have the possibility of Cy Lawton making trouble for Len. Not to mention the busybodies who like nothing better than to chew on a good story.
You're living with the master body of the lot, Sarah Jane reminded me. Augusta will set the village straight before the next Sabbath. As for Cy Lawton, if what I suspect is so, you won't hear any more out of him. I looked at Sarah Jane dubiously.
What do you suspect?
Mabel, you'll have to swallow your pride and talk this whole thing over with Len. I'd ask you to stay and have supper with me, but you need to get back before dark. She grinned. Unless you want the busybodies chewing on you. We walked out to the buggy together and I hugged her.
I don't know what I'd ever do without you, Sarah Jane. You always manage to turn things right side up for me.
That's true, she nodded. If I didn't intervene, you'd spend half your life spinning around on your ear. Now get. I'll see you Friday. And don't forget to wash my handkerchief. She waved goodbye and I turned Regal's head toward home. I had to admit my foolish pride had blown the whole incident out of proportion. If I had only allowed Len to tell me about it, I could have avoided one giant headache. Suddenly I realized that my pain was gone, and I was starving. I urged Regal to go faster, and we were back in North Branch before the sun went down. Len saw me coming and was standing by the porch when I stopped the buggy. He put out his hand to help me down, but I held out both arms. He caught me and held me close.
I'm sorry, Len. I should have let you explain what happened. But you don't have to tell me anything at all. I trust you.
But I want to tell you, he said. Come and have supper, then we'll talk. Later, as we walked slowly toward home, Len unfolded his story. Elizabeth overheard Jerome ask me to go to Springdale with him, so after I left the church, she asked him if she could ride along. I didn't know until we were on the way that Jerome wouldn't be coming back with us.
Once again, Sarah Jane is proven right,
I thought. I didn't see her all day, he continued. But when I got back to the place where we were to meet, Regal was gone. I looked that town over till dark, and by that time, the livery stable was closed. There was nothing to do but get rooms for the night. Elizabeth stayed at a boarding house, and I stayed in the hotel. In the morning, I hired a horse and picked her up. Len paused. I guess her conscience was starting to hurt because she admitted that she had turned Regal loose and started him for home.
Oh, Len! No!
I gasped. Then I shook my head.
It won't surprise Augusta any. She'll say it's just the kind of trick she would expect that girl to pull. I'm surprised you didn't put her out on the road and let her walk home.
Don't think I wasn't tempted, Len declared. If I'd found out about the horse before we left town, I'd have left her there and sent her pa back to get her. I did let her know that if she failed to tell her father exactly what happened, I'd be over there to tell him myself.
Len, I think Augusta deserves to know what happened,
I said when we reached the house.
I haven't been very decent to her lately.
We told her the story in brief, and her reaction to Elizabeth's scheming was just as I'd predicted. Then Augusta rose to get ready for bed. I hope whatever business you had to take care of was worth all that, she said. This has been one dismal place for the last 2 days. We looked at each other after she had left. Poor Augusta, Len said. She doesn't know half the story about that trip. I'm afraid dismal isn't going to cover it when we tell her about those papers. He sighed. We'll talk more tomorrow. It's sure to be a better day than this one has been.
End of chapter 9.